Hello guys, hope you're all doing really well. It's Cassidy again, and today we're going to read part 10 of Cinder by Marissa Meyer. Chapter 26. Prince Kai arrived at the meeting 17 minutes late. He was met with the disgruntled looks of Torin and 4 other government officials all sitting at a long table, along with an additional dozen faces peering out from their respective net screens on the paneled wall before him. Ambassadors from every earthen country, the UK, the European Federation, the African Union, the American Republic, and Australia. 1 queen, 2 prime ministers, 1 president, 1 governor-general, 3 state representatives, and 2 province representatives. Text along the bottom of the screens helpfully displayed their names, titles, and country affiliations. "How kind of the young prince to grace us with his presence," said Torin as the officials around the table stood to welcome Kai. Kai waved Torin's comment away. "I thought you could use my guidance." On wall screens, Prime Minister Kamen of Africa grunted most unladylike. Everyone else remained silent. Kai moved to take his regular seat when Torin stopped him and gestured at the chair at the end of the table. The Emperor's chair. Jaws clenching, Kai switched seats. He looked up at the grid of faces, though each of their world leaders was thousands of miles away, staring into their own wall of net screens. It felt as if their eyes were focused on him, disapproving. Kai cleared his throat, trying not to fidget. "Is the conference link secure?" he asked, the question bringing back his concerns over the direct communication chip Cinder had found inside 9Z. The screens in this room were equipped with DCOM so that they could hold international meetings without fear of anyone listening in through the net. Had the chip inside 9Z been there by one of Levana's cronies for the same reason? Secrecy, privacy? If so, what exactly had she learned? "Of course," said Torin. "The links have been verified for nearly 20 minutes, Your Highness. We were just discussing Earth's relationship with Luna when you deigned to join us." Kai clasped his hands together. "Right. Now, is that the one where the dominatrix queen throws a tantrum and threatens war every time she doesn't get her way? That relationship?" No one laughed. Torin's gaze focused on Kai. "Is this timing inconvenient for you, Your Highness?" Kai cleared his throat. "I apologize, that was inappropriate." He met the faces of the Earth's leaders, watching him from thousands of miles away. He gripped his hands beneath the table, feeling like a child sitting in on his father's meetings. "Obviously," said President Vargas from America, "the relationship between Earth and Luna has been strained for many years, and the rule of Queen Levana has only made things worse. We can't put blame on any one party, but the important thing is that we fix it before she starts a war," finished a province representative from South America, as the young prince has already observed. "But if the reports on the net are not mistaken," said Governor-General Williams of Australia, "communication between Earth and Luna has begun again. Can it be true that Levana is on Earth now?" I could hardly believe the news when I heard it. "Yes," said Torin, all eyes switched to him. The Queen arrived yesterday afternoon, and her head thaumaturge, Sybil Mira, has been a guest in our court for just over 2 weeks. Has Levana informed you of the purpose for this visit?" Said Prime Minister Kamen. "She claims she wants to reach a peace agreement." One of the American representatives guffawed. "I'll believe it when I see it." President Vargas ignored the comment. "Quite suspicious timing, isn't it? So soon after—" He didn't finish. No one looked at Kai. "We agree," said Torin, "but we couldn't refuse the request when it came." "It does seem she is always more apt to discuss an alliance with the Commonwealth than any of us," said President Vargas, "but her requests were always unsatisfactory. Have those requests changed?" Kai watched from the corner of his eye as Torin's chest slowly expanded. "No," he said. "To our knowledge, Her Majesty's requests have not changed. Her aim continues to be a marriage alliance with the Commonwealth's Emperor." Although the faces in the room and the screens tried to remain static, the discomfort ratcheted around them. Kai gripped his hands so tight that the crescent moons were left from his fingernails. He had always despised the diplomacy of these meetings. Everyone thinking the same thing, no one brave enough to say it. And of course they would all be sympathetic to Kai's fate, and yet glad it wasn't any of them. They would be angry that Queen Levana could infiltrate any earthen country with her dictatorship, and yet certain that it would be an improvement over infiltrating Earth with her army. The Commonwealth's position, continued Torrin, has also not changed. This did seem to jolt the crowd. You won't marry her? Said Queen Camilla of the United Kingdom, the wrinkles on her forehead deepening. Kai squared his shoulders in defense. My father was firm in his decision to avoid such an alliance, and I believe his reasons are as applicable today as they were last week or last year or 10 years ago. I must consider what is best for my country. Have you told this to Levana? I have not lied to her. And what will be her next move? Said Prime Minister Bromstad of Europe, a fair-haired man with kind eyes. What else? Said Kai. She intends to add more bargaining chips to the pile until we cave. Stairs clashed through the screens. Torrin's lips had gone white, his eyes urging Kai to tread lightly. Kai could guess that Torrin hadn't intended to mention the antidote, at least until they could plan their next move. But leishmaniasis was a pandemic that affected all of them. They at least had a right to know that an antidote might exist, assuming Levana hadn't lied to him. Kai took in a deep breath, splaying his palms out on the table. Levana claims to have found a cure for leishmaniasis. The net screen seemed to crackle with surprise, though the leaders gathered were all too stunned to speak. She brought a single dose with her, and I passed it off to our research team. We won't know if it's a true antidote until they had a chance to study it. If it is real, then we need to find out if we can replicate it. And if we can't? Kai looked at the Australian Governor-General. He was older than Kai's father had been by many years. They were all so much older than him. I don't know, he said, but I will do what has to be done for the Commonwealth. He enunciated Commonwealth very carefully. True, they were an alliance 6 countries and a single planet strong, but they all had their own loyalties, and he would not forget his. Even then, said Torrin, we can yet hope to make her see reason and convince her to sign the Treaty of Berman without a marriage alliance. She will refuse, said a state representative from the EF. We mustn't fool ourselves. She is as stubborn. Of course, the Commonwealth's imperial family is not the only royal bloodline she could harbor hopes of marrying into, said the African state representative. He said this knowing that his own country could not be a choice, as it was not a monarchy. Any marriage bond would be too superficial, too transient. He continued, I think we should explore all possibilities so that we can be sure to have an offer prepared no matter what she decides to do next. An offer that we, as a group, feel would best benefit the citizenry of our entire planet. Kai had followed the group's attention to Queen Camilla of the UK, who had an unmarried son in his early 30s, closer to Levana's age than Kai was. He noted how passive the Queen was trying to appear and how to keep himself from looking smug. It felt nice to turn the tables. And yet, politically, there was no doubt that Kai was the best option in Queen Levana's eyes. The prince from the United Kingdom was the youngest of 3 siblings and might never become king. Kai, on the other hand, would be coronated next week. What if she refuses anyone else? Said Queen Camilla, lifting an eyebrow that had seen too many youth surgeries over the years. When no one responded to the question, she continued, I don't mean to raise undue alarm, but have you considered that her reason for coming to Earth might be to secure this alliance with force? Perhaps she intends to brainwash the young prince into marrying her. Kai's stomach flipped. He could see his unease mirrored in the faces of the other diplomats. Could she do that? He asked. When no one was quick to answer, he turned to Torrin. It took far too long for Torrin to shake his head, looking frighteningly uncertain. No, he said. Perhaps in theory, but no. In order to keep the ruse, she could never leave your side. As soon as you were no longer under her influence, you could prove that the marriage wasn't legitimate. She wouldn't risk that. You mean we hope she wouldn't risk it, said Kai, not feeling very comforted. What about Levana's daughter, Princess Winter? Said President Vargas. Has there been any discussion of her stepdaughter? Said Torrin. And what should we discuss in regards to the lunar princess? Why can't we form a marriage alliance with her? Said Queen Camilla. She can't be any worse than Levana. Torrin folded his hands atop the table. Princess Winter was of another mother, and her father was a mere palace guard. She has no royal blood. But Luna might still honor a marriage alliance through her, said Kai. Wouldn't they? Torrin sighed, looking like he wished Kai had kept his mouth shut. Politically, perhaps, but it does not change the fact that Queen Levana is in the difficult position of needing to marry and produce an heir who will continue the bloodline. I do not think she will agree to marry off her stepdaughter so long as she requires a suitable marriage arrangement. And there is no hope, said the African Prime Minister, that the Lunars will ever accept Princess Winter as a queen. Only if you can convince them to give up their superstitions, said Torin, and we all know how deeply those are ingrained in their culture. Otherwise they will insist on an heir of the royal bloodline. And what if Levana never has an heir? What will they do then? Kai set his gaze to his advisor and raised an eyebrow. I'm not sure, Torin answered. I'm sure the royal family has plenty of distant cousins who would be eager to stake their claim to the throne. So Levana must marry, said the South American representative, and she will only marry a Commonwealth emperor, and the Commonwealth emperor refuses to marry her. What then? We are at a stalemate. Perhaps, said Governor General Williams, she will make good on her threats. Torin shook his head. If her desire were to start a war, she has had plenty of opportunities. It seems clear, shot back the Governor General, that her desire is to be an empress. But we don't know what she has planned if you won't. Actually, we do have an idea, said President Vargas, his voice heavy. I'm afraid we no longer need to speculate if Levana intends to start a war against Earth. Our sources lead me to believe that war is not only likely but imminent. An uneasy rustle shifted through the room. If our theories are correct, said President Vargas, Levana is planning to move against Earth within the next 6 months. Kai leaned forward, fidgeting with the collar of his shirt. What theories? It seems Queen Levana is building an army. Confusion swept through the room. Certainly the moon has had an army for some time, said Prime Minister Bromstad. It is hardly news, nor is it controversial. We cannot request that they forego the keeping of an army entirely, much as we might like to. This is not the moon's normal army, soldiers and thaumaturges, said President Vargas, nor is it any army we're keeping on Earth. Here are some photographs that our orbiting operatives are able to obtain. The president's image faded and was replaced with a fuzzy picture as if taken from very far away. Satellite photos taken without sunlight. Nevertheless, in the grainy picture, Kai could make out rows and rows of men standing. He squinted and another picture flickered onto the screen, closer up, showing the backs of four of the men from up above. But, Kai noticed with a shock, these were not men. Their shoulders were too wide, too hunched. Their barely discernible profiles too stretched. Their backs were covered with what appeared to be fur. Another picture came on the screen. It showed a half dozen of the creatures from the front, their faces a cross between man and beast. Their noses and jaws protruded awkwardly from their heads, their lips twisted into perpetual grimaces. White spots erupted from their mouths. Kai could not see them clearly, could not tell for sure, but they gave him the distinct impression of fangs. What are these creatures? Asked Queen Camilla. Mutants, answered President Vargas. We believe they are genetically engineered lunars. This is a project we assume has been going on for many decades. We have estimated 600 of them in this holding alone, but we suspect there are more, likely in the network of lava tubes beneath the moon's surface. There could be thousands, or tens of thousands for all we know. And do they possess magic? It was a hesitant question posed by the Canadian province rep. The picture disappeared, showing the American president again. We don't know. We have not been able to see them train or do anything other than stand in formation and march in and out of the caverns. They are lunar, said Queen Levana. If they are not dead, no, said Queen Camilla. If they are not dead, then they possess magic. We have no proof that they kill their ungifted infants, interrupted Torin. And as exciting as it is to look at these pictures and create wild speculations, we must keep in mind that Queen Levana has not yet attacked Earth, and we have no evidence that these creatures are intended for such an attack. What else could they be intended for? Said Governor General Williams. Manual labor? Said Torin, daring anyone to deny the possibility. The Governor General sniffed but said nothing. We should, of course, be prepared should a war come to pass. But in the meantime, our priority needs to be forming an alliance with Luna, not alienating it with paranoia and distrust. No, said Kai, propping his chin on his fist. I think this is the perfect time for paranoia and distrust. Torin scowled. Your Highness. It seems you've all missed the very obvious point of those pictures. President Vargas puffed out his chest. What do you mean? You say they've probably been building this army for decades, perfecting whatever science they've used for these creatures? So it would seem. Then why have we only noticed it now? He waved his hand at the screen where the images had been. Hundreds of them, standing out in the open as if they have nothing better to do, waiting to have their pictures taken. He folded his arms on top of the table, watching as an uncertain expression watching its uncertain expressions turn toward him. Queen Lavanna wanted us to see her spook army. She wanted us to take notice. You think she's trying to threaten us? Said Prime Minister Kamen. Kai shut his eyes, seeing the rows of beasts fresh in his mind. No, I think she's trying to threaten me. Chapter 27. The hover rumbled to a stop outside the quarantine. Cinder flew out of the side hatch and immediately reeled back, covering her nose with her elbow. Her gut heaved at the stench, rotting flesh intensified by the steamy afternoon heat. Just outside the warehouse's entrance, a group of medroids were loading dead bodies into a hover to be carted away, their forms bloated and discolored, each with a red slit in the wrist. Cinder looked away, keeping her eyes averted and her breath held as she slid past them into the warehouse. The sunlight turned from glaring to murky, caught by the green sheeting on the windows outside along the ceiling. The quarantine had been nearly empty before. Now it was overflowing with victims, every age, every gender. Buffeting fans on the ceiling did little to dispel the sweltering heat or the smell of death. The air was heavy with it. Medroids buzzed between the beds, but there were not enough of them to tend all of the sick. Cinder slipped down an aisle, gasping for shallow breaths against her sleeve. She spotted Puny's green brocade blanket and ran to the foot of the bed. Puny. When Puny didn't stir, she reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. The blanket was soft, warm, but the bulk beneath it didn't move. Shaking, Cinder grasped the edge of the comforter and pulled it back. Puny whimpered, a mild protest which sent relieved chills across Cinder's arms. She slumped down beside the bed. Stars, Puny, I came as soon as I heard. Puny squinted up at her, eyes bleary. Her face was ashen, her lips peeling. The dark splotches on her neck had begun to fade to lavender beneath the surface of her ghostly skin. Eyes on Cinder, she pulled her arm out from beneath the blanket and spread out her fingers, displaying their blue-black tips and the yellowish tinge of her nails. I know, but it's going to be all right. Still panting, Cinder unbuttoned the pocket on the side of her cargo pants and pulled out the glove that normally lived on her right hand. The vial was in one of the fingers protected. I brought something for you. Can you sit up? Puny pulled her hand into a loose fist and tucked it again beneath the blanket. Her eyes were hollow. Cinder didn't think she'd heard her. Puny. A ping echoed in Cinder's head. Her display showed an incoming message from Adri, and the familiar surge of anxiety that came with it clamped Cinder's throat. She dismissed the message. Puny, listen to me. I need you to sit up. Can you do that? Mom, Puny whispered, spittle collecting at the corner of her lips. She's at home. She doesn't know that you're dying. But of course Adri did know. The comm would have gone to her too. Pulse racing, Cinder bent over Puny and slid her arm beneath her shoulder. Come on, I'll help you. Her expression didn't change, the blank corpse stare. But she did let out a pained groan when Cinder lifted her up. I'm sorry, she said, but I need you to drink this. Another ping, another message from Adri. This time irritation welled up in Cinder and she shut off the netlink, blocking any more incoming messages. It's from the palace. It might help. Do you understand? She kept her voice low, worried that the other patients might riot against her. But her gaze remained empty. A cure, Puny, she hissed against her ear. An antidote. She said nothing, head drooping against Cinder's shoulder. Her body had gone limp, but she was as white as a wooden doll. Cinder's throat felt coaxed in sand as she stared into Puny's empty eyes. Eyes looking past her, through her. Didn't you hear me? Cinder pulled Puny fully against her, and uncorked the vial. You have to drink this. She held the vial to Puny's lips, but Puny didn't flinch. Hand trembling, she coaxed Puny's head back. Her papery lips fell open. Cinder forced her hand to still as she lifted the vial, afraid to spill a single drop. She set the glass against Puny's lips and held her breath, but paused. Her heart was convulsing. Her head felt heavy with tears that wouldn't come. She shook her head harshly. Puny, please. When no sound or air passed through Puny's lips, Cinder lowered the vial. She buried her head into the crook of Puny's neck, gritting her teeth until her jaw ached. Each breath stung as it entered her throat, rank with the stench around her. But even now, she caught whiffs of Puny's shampoo from so many days past. Clutching the vial in her fist, she gently released her sister, letting her slip back onto the pillow. Her eyes were still open. Cinder slammed her fist onto the mattress. Some of the antidote splashed up over her thumb. Squeezing her eyes until stars flashed before her, she slumped over and planted her face into the blanket. Damn it, puny! Rocking back on her heels, she sucked in a long, uneven breath and gazed at her little sister's heart-shaped face and lifeless eyes. I kept my promise. I brought it for you. She barely refrained from shattering the vial in her fist. Plus, I talked to Kai. Puny, he's going to dance with you. He told me he would. Don't you get it? You can't die. I'm here. A splitting headache rocked her against the bed. Rocked, um, She gripped the edge of the mattress and lowered her head, letting it hang to her chest. The pain was coming from the top of her spine again, but it didn't overwhelm her like before. Um, just uncomfortable heat like a sunburn on the inside. It passed, leaving only a dull throbbing behind. And the thought of Peony's blank stare haunting her. She lifted her head and corked the vial with weak fingers, slipping it back into her pocket. Reaching up, she closed Peony's eyes. Cinder heard the familiar crunch of treads on the dirty concrete and spotted a Medroid coming toward her. No water or damp rags in its prongs. It paused on the other side of Peony's bed, opened its torso, and retrieved a scalpel. Cinder reached across the bed and clamped her gloved hand over Peony's wrist. No, she said, louder than she'd intended. Nearby patients lolled their heads toward her. The android sensor rose to her, still dim. Thieves, convicts, fugitives. You can't have this one. The android stood with its blank white face, its scalpel jutting from its torso. Bits of dried blood clung to the edge. Without speaking, the android reached forward with one of its free arms and latched into Peony's elbow. I have been programmed. I don't care what you've been programmed to do. You can't have this one. Cinder yanked Peony's arm out of the android's grip. The pinchers left deep scratches across her skin. I must remove and preserve her ID chip, the android said, reaching forward again. Cinder bent over the bed and plastered her hand against the android's sensor, holding it at bay. I said you're not getting it. Leave her alone. The android swung, the scalpel up, burying the tip into Cinder's glove. It clanged metal on metal. Cinder reeled back in surprise. The fabric clung to the thick fabric of her work gloves. Gritting her teeth, she wrenched the scalpel from the glove and jammed it into the android sensor. Glass shattered. The glowing yellow light flashed out. The android wheeled back, metal arms swinging, loud beeps and error messages spilling from its hidden speakers. Cinder barreled over the bed and slammed her fist into the android's head. It crashed to the ground, silenced, arms still twitching. Panting, Cinder looked around. The patients who could were sitting up in bed, blinking glossy eyes. A Medroid 4 aisles away left its patients and rambled toward her. Cinder sucked in her breath. Crouching down, she reached into the android's shattered sensor and grabbed the scalpel. She spun back to Peony. The disheveled blankets, the scratches on her arm, the blue fingertips dangling over the side of the bed. Kneeling beside her, she asked for hurried forgiveness while she grasped her sister's fragile wrist. She spliced the scalpel into the soft tissue. Blood dribbled out of the wound and onto her glove, mixing with years of grime. Peony's fingers twitched when Cinder hit a tendon, making her jump. When the cut was wide enough, she peeled it open with her thumb, revealing bright red muscle, blood. Her stomach squirmed when she dug the tip of the blade as carefully in as she could, easing up to squirch it. I'm so sorry, she whispered, seeing the mutilated wrist down on Peony, setting the mutilated wrist down on her stomach and standing. The grating of the Medroid's treads worked closer. Ashes, ashes. She spun toward the dry, sing-song voice. Scalpel grinned firmly in one hand. Peony's chip protected in the other. The small boy in the next aisle shrank back as his dilated eyes spotted the weapon. The nursery rhyme faded away. It took Cinder a moment to recognize him. Chang Sunto from the market, Sacha's son. His eyes now glossy with sweat, black hair matted to one side of his head from sleeping too much. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. Everyone who was strong enough to sit up was staring at her. Stealing a breath, Cinder swept towards Sunto. She fished the vial from her pocket and forced it into his clammy fingers. Drink this. The Medroid reached the foot of the bed, and Cinder shoved it aside. It toppled to the ground like a fallen pawn. Sundo's delirious eyes followed her without recognition. "Drink it," she ordered, pulling out the stopper and forcing the vial up to his mouth. She waited for his lips to close around it, then she ran. The sun momentarily blinded her as she bolted into the street. Blocked from her hover by the medroids and two gurneys of dead patients, she spun and ran in the other direction. She turned a corner and had gone 4 blocks when she heard another hover overhead. The hum of magnets awakening beneath her pounding feet. "Then, Cinder," came a booming voice over the speaker. "You are hereby ordered to halt and be taken peacefully into custody." She cursed. Were they arresting her? Planting her feet, she turned to face the light hover, panting. It was a law enforcement vehicle, manned by more androids. How had they gotten to her so quickly? "I didn't steal it," she yelled, holding up her fist with puny strip enclosed. "It belongs to the family, not you or anyone else." The hover settled on the ground, its engine still throbbing. An android alighted from a ramp, its yellow eyes scanning Cinder up and down as it approached her. It held a taser in its prongs. She shuffled back, her heels kicking up debris on the deserted street. "Haven't done anything wrong," she said, hands extending toward the android. "That medroid was attacking me. It was self-defense." "When, Cinder," said the machine's mechanical voice, "we have been contacted by your legal guardian in regard to your unauthorized disappearance. You are hereby in violation of the Cyber Protection Act and have been labeled as a runaway cyborg. Our orders are to apprehend you by force if necessary and return you to your legal guardian. If you come peacefully, this infraction will not be recorded on your permanent record." Cinder squinted, confused. A bead of sweat rolled over her eyebrow as she looked from the android who had spoken to the second android just leaving the hover's ramp. "Wait," she said, lowering her hands. "Adri sent you?" Chapter 28. The uncomfortable silence of the dining hall was broken only by the clatter of chopsticks against porcelain and the shuffling of servants' feet. Only human servers were present, a concession to Levana's avid distrust of androids. She claimed it went against her people's morals and the laws of nature to bestow fake emotions and thoughts on man-made machines. Kai knew, however, that she didn't just like androids because she couldn't brainwash them. Sitting opposite the queen, Kai found himself struggling not to look at her. It was both a temptation and a repellent, and both feelings irritated him. Torin was beside him, and Levana was flanked by Sybil and her second thaumaturge. The 2 lunar guards stood against the walls. Kai wondered if they ever ate. The Emperor's seat at the end of the table would remain empty until the coronation. He did not want to look at that empty chair either. Levana made a grand flourishing gesture, drawing everyone's attention to her, though it resulted in nothing more than taking a sip of tea. Her lips curled as she set the cup down, her gaze meeting Kai's. "Sybil tells me your little festival is an annual occurrence," she said, the cadence of her voice swooning like a lullaby. "Yes," Kai said, lifting a shrimp wonton between his chopsticks. "It falls on the ninth full moon of each year." "Ah, how lovely for you to base your holidays on the cycle of my planet." Kai wanted to scoff at the word planet, but sucked it back down his throat. "It is a celebration of the end of the Fourth World War," said Torin. Levana clucked her tongue. "That is the problem with so many little countries on a single globe, so many wars." Something splattered on Kai's plate. He looked down to see that the wonton's filling had been squeezed from its wrapper. "Perhaps we should be glad the war happened, then, and force the countries to conglomerate as they did. I hardly think it harmed the well-being of the citizenry," said Levana. Kai's pulse throbbed in his ears. Millions had died in World War IV. Whole cultures had been devastated, dozens of cities reduced to rubble, including the original Beijing. Not to mention the countless natural resources that had been destroyed through war and through nuclear and chemical warfare. Yes, he is quite sure some harm had been done to the citizenry's well-being. "More tea, Your Highness?" said Torin, startling Kai. He realized he'd been gripping his chopstick like a weapon. Grumbling inwardly, he sat back, allowing a servant to refill his cup. "We can give credit to the war for bringing about the Treaty of Bremen," said Torin, "which has thus far been beneficial to all countries in the Earthen Union. We hope, of course, to see your signature on the document someday soon, Your Majesty." The queen's lips tightened against her teeth. Indeed, the good of the trees is thoroughly discussed in your history books. And yet I can't help but feel that Luna, a single country ruled by a single government, provides an even more ideal arrangement, one that is fair and beneficial to all inhabitants. Assuming that the ruling government is fair, said Kai. A flash of contempt swept the queen's jaw, but almost instantly faded into a serene smile. Which of course Luna has, as is evidenced by hundreds of years without a single uprising, not even the smallest protest. Our history books attest to that. Shocking. Kai would have grumbled if it hadn't been for Torrens' glower upon him. It is a testament that every ruler strives for, said Torren. The servants came forward and whisked away the first course, replacing it with silver trains. My queen is as eager to forge a bond between Luna and Earth as you are, said Sybil. It is a shame that an agreement could not be reached under the rule of your father, but we are hopeful that you, your highness, will be more accepting of our terms. Kai again strove to loosen his grip, lest he accidentally leap across the table and jab a chopstick into the witch's eye. His father had tried every compromise imaginable to forge an alliance with Luna, except the one thing that he could not agree to. The one thing he was sure would signal the end of freedom for his people, a marriage to Queen Levana. But nobody objected to Sybil's comment, not even himself. He couldn't get the image from today's meeting out of his head. The lunar mutations, the army of beast-like creatures, waiting. It chilled him not only because of what he'd seen, but of what he could imagine he hadn't seen. If he were right, then Levana had put her army out for show, as a threat. But he knew she couldn't give away, but he knew she wouldn't give her hand so easily away. So what else was she hiding? And did he dare risk finding out? Marriage, war. The servants simultaneously lifted the silver domes from the trays, releasing clouds of steam scented of garlic and sesame oil. Kai mumbled a thank you to the server over his shoulder, but the words were interrupted by a gasp from the queen. She shoved her chair away from the table. The legs screeched across the floor. Startled, Kai followed the queen's gaze to her plate. Instead of thinly cut pork tenderloin and rice noodles, the plate harbored a small hand mirror set into a shimmering silver-white frame. How dare you! Levana turned blazing eyes on the servant who had delivered the meal, a middle-aged woman with fine gray hair. The servant stumbled back, her eyes round as the mirror. Levana stood up so fast, her chair tumbled to the floor behind her. A chorus of chair legs creaked on the floor as everyone stood. Speak, you disgusting earthen! How dare you insult me? The servant tossed her head mute. Your Majesty, Kai started. Sybil, my queen, this human has shown disrespect. It is not to be tolerated. Your Majesty, said Torren, please calm yourself. We do not know that this woman is to blame. We mustn't jump to conclusions. Then she must be made an example of, said Sybil quite coolly. Um, and the and the true perpetrator can thus suffer the guilt, which is often a far worse punishment. That is not how our system works, said Torren. His face had flushed red. While you reside in the Commonwealth, you abide by our laws. I will not follow your laws so long as they permit disobedience to flourish, said Levana. Sybil. Sybil rounded the queen's fallen chair. The servant backed away, bowing, muttering apologies and begging for mercy, and not knowing what she said. Stop it, leave her alone, said Kai, rushing toward the servant. Sybil snatched a knife from the service table and held its handle out to the woman. The woman took the knife, crying, pleading as she did so. Kai's jaw dropped. He was both disgusted and mesmerized as the servant turned the blade toward herself, clutching the blade handle with both hands. Sybil's beautiful face remained complacent. The servant's hands trembled, and slowly lifted the knife into the glistening edge that was poised at the corner of her eye. No, she whimpered. Please. Kai's entire body shook as he realized what Sybil meant to force the woman into. Heart racing, he squared his shoulders. I did it. The room stilled, silenced, but for the woman's bumbling sobs. Everyone turned to Kai. The queen, Torren, the servant with the tiny inflamed scratch behind her eyelid, her knife still in her hand. I did it, he repeated. He looked to Sybil, who watched him without expression, and then at Queen Lavanna. The Queen fisted both hands at her sides. Her dark gaze seethed. Her complexion shimmered. In a single tilting moment she was hideous, with her ragged breath and sneering coral lips. Kai ran his dry tongue over the roof of his mouth. I ordered the kitchen to put the mirror on your tray. He pressed his arms firmly against his sides to keep him from shaking. It was meant as a friendly joke. I understand now that it was an ignorant decision, and a joke would not cross cultural lines. And I could only apologize and ask for your forgiveness. He leveled his gaze at Lavanna. But if forgiveness is not in your power, then at least direct your anger toward me and not the servant, who would have had no idea that the mirror was there. The punishment should all be mine. He had thought the tension was bad during the appetizer course, but now he was choking on it. Lavanna's breathing returned to normal as her eyes weighed her options. She didn't believe him. It was a lie, and everyone in the room knew it. But he had confessed. She opened her fists, stretching her fingers out against the material of her dress. Release the servant. The energy dispersed. Kai felt his ears pop as if the air pressure in the room had changed. The knife clattered to the floor, and the servant stumbled back, crashing into a wall. Her shaking hands flattened over her face. Her eyes, her face, her head. Thank you for your honesty, Your Highness, Lavanna said, her tone flat and hollow. Your apology is accepted. The crying woman was led away from the dining room. Torin reached across the table, picking up the silver dome, and covered the mirror. Bring our most honored guest her entree. That won't be necessary, said Lavanna. I have quite lost my appetite. Your Majesty, said Torin. I will retire to my quarters, said the Queen. She was still battling Kai across the table, her eyes cold and calculating, and he unable to look away. I have learned something very valuable about you tonight, young prince. I hope you have learned something about me as well. That you prefer to rule through fear rather than justice? So sorry, Your Majesty, I'm afraid I already knew that about you. No, indeed. I hope you notice that I am capable of choosing my battles. Her lips curved, her beauty returning full force. If that is what it takes to win the war. She departed from the room like a feather, as if nothing at all had happened, her entourage following and a step behind her. Only when the guards' clopping feet had drifted down the halls did Kai slump into the nearest seat, head hanging over his knees. His stomach was heaving. Every nerve shook. He heard a chair being set upright, and Torin settled beside him with a heavy sigh. We should find out who is really at fault for the mirror. If it was someone on the staff, they should be suspended so long as the Queen is staying at the palace. Kai lifted his head far enough to peer over the table's edge, seeing the towering silver dome in front of the Queen's abandoned chair. Inhaling a breath, she reached forward and uncovered the mirror, then grasped its slender handle. It was smooth as glass, but sparkled like diamonds when he twisted it in the dim lighting. He had only seen material like that once before, on a spaceship. Holding the mirror's face toward Torin, he shook his head, disgusted. Mystery solved, he said, turning the mirror around so his advisor could see the strange lunar rune carved into the back of the frame. Torin's eyes widened. She was testing you. Kai let the mirror tip back onto the table. He rubbed his brow with the outstretched fingers still shaking. Your Highness, a messenger clicked his heels from the doorway. I have an urgent message from the Secretary of Public Health and Safety. Kai tilted his head, squinting at the messenger through his bangs. Couldn't she send a calm? He asked, checking his belt with his free hand before remembering that Lavanna had requested no port screens at their dinner. He grunted and sat up. What's the message? The messenger stepped into the dining room, his eyes bright. There's been a disturbance at the District 29 quarantine. An unidentified person attacked 2 Medroids, disabling one of them, and then escaped. Kai frowned, straightening. A patient? We're unsure. The only android that would have reported a good visual was the one that was disabled. Another android caught glimpses of the act from afar, but only of the perpetrator's back. We've been unable to get an accurate ID. The perpetrator didn't seem ill, though. Everyone at the quarantines is ill. The messenger hesitated. Kai gripped the arms of the chair. We have to find him, if he has the disease. It appeared to be a female, Your Highness. And there's more. The footage we have shows her speaking to another patient, moments after she attacked the first Medroid. A young boy by the name of Changsuto. He was admitted to the quarantine yesterday with stage 2 leishmaniasis. And the servant cleared his throat. The boy seems to be recovering. From what? From the attack? No, Your Highness. Recovering from the disease.